Good evening, everyone. My name is Ken Jones, and I welcome you to our War Industry Resistors Network webinar. We do these every month, and this evening's event, very happy to have our two presenters here to talk to us about what's happening in Atlanta with the Cop City and all of the developments that have happened there, which hopefully many of you are aware of already. As I said in our announcement about this webinar, our emphasis is the military-industrial complex and all the tentacles that go with it. The militarization of police is certainly one of them, which is why we're covering this issue, and happy to be doing so. So I'm going to introduce our presenters in a minute, but before I do, as is our custom, we're going to have Paul Shannon tell us a little bit about the War Industry Resistors Network, just in the event that you don't know already. So, Paul.
Okay, well, thank you, Ken. I'll be quick because we just want to let everyone here know, if you're not part of our network yet, of groups all around the country focusing on a local military contractor in their region, and doing everything they can to let people know what they're doing and to oppose the weapons production and the policies that these big companies are pushing. Please get involved with us. To help you do that, I just put the link to our brand new website that we want to, it's very snazzy, and we want everyone to take a look at it, and you'll find there how to get involved with us. And you'll also find this type of stuff we're up to. For instance, last month, we work in support of the Merchants of Death War Criminalist Tribunal that's going to happen in November. A bunch of our groups delivered subpoenas to various Raytheon, Lockheed, General Dynamics officials to tell them to show up to testify. I'm sure they will. And in addition to that, a lot of our groups did a lot of actions around tax day. In May, we'll be asking our organizations to pull together to collaborate on similar actions as well. I do want to mention that the webinar tonight, in addition to being a production of the War Industry Resistors Network, it's co-sponsored by the Racial Justice Indigenous Solidarity Working Group at Massachusetts Peace Action, as well as, of course, the Raytheon anti-war campaign. I just want to make sure that people know that, as Ken mentioned, following the webinar tonight, within a couple of days, you'll be getting an email with a recording of tonight's program. If you know people that didn't get a chance to see it and you think they'd like to, please send them the link to that. And you'll also be getting a link to a tremendous article that Micah, one of our speakers tonight, wrote about the background to Cop City and how Cop City and what's happening there is rooted in gentrification and other developments in the Atlanta area that is rapidly changing the makeup of the region there. So that's a very important article to look at. And then you will also get a link to Kiana's address to the city council there down there, in which he really lays it on the line in terms of what's at stake here and how the voice of the people of the region down there is being ignored, and that cannot be allowed to stand. So you'll be getting those exciting links and one or two others within a day or two after the webinar tonight. So let's get right into it, right, Ken? This is such an important issue, something that we all have to know about, because it's what's happening there is just so incredible.
Good. Thanks so much, Paul. And so now it's my honor and privilege to introduce our speakers, and I'll introduce them both right now and just let them have at it. Our first speaker is Micah Herskin, and he is an organizer and policy advocate in Atlanta. Both our presenters are living in Atlanta right now. He writes about the prison industrial complex and movements to abolish it, and has written for New York Magazine, Teen Vogue, Race and Class, Defector, Prism, and other outlets. And you can see him on Democracy Now! And we included a link on that when we sent out our initial announcement. And our second presenter will be Reverend Kiana Jones. She's a political and social justice activist and community organizer in Atlanta. Since 2021, she's been an advocate for families who have lost their children to police brutality. She currently works as the executive administrator for the New Georgia Project. It's a voter engagement and civic education organization, and serves as chaplain for the board of directors of Recovery House, New Jersey. She's the proprietor of E=MC² Educational Services, where she works as a homeschool curriculum consultant, IEP advocate, and German translator. You can see her speaking at the Atlantic City Council on the link that I'm sent out before, and I will send out again. And so without further ado, we'll turn it over to Micah. Please go right ahead, Micah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to share screen. All right. Cool. Well, it's so good to be with you all tonight. Can I get a thumbs up if people can see the screen? Okay, amazing. So Kiana and I are both going to speak for about 15 minutes, and I think we want to leave time for questions. And we're just going to sort of run through, what is happening here. How did this happen? I'm sure, probably if you're on this call, you've heard about Cop City and the travesty of justice that it is. But I think there's probably, less knowledge circulating around sort of how this happened and how people have been fighting about it. And, this sort of first went national and international and was in all the headlines after our comrade Tortuguito was killed in January of 2023. But people have been fighting this really since the spring of 2021. So this has really been, going on a long time. So I'm going to run through sort of, the first phase of things of sort of, when was this proposed? Why was it proposed? Who is behind it? Who was against it? And I think that's where we're going to talk a little bit about the prison industrial complex and the police industrial complex in Atlanta. And obviously that is connected to the military industrial complex. And so I'm eager to hear, how the synergy between the anti-war folks and the anti-police folks, because I think that those are in a lot of ways the same fight. All right. So I'm going to try to move a little bit fast because there's a lot of information, and I really want to get you to the main show, which is Kiana. So to sort of set the scene in Atlanta. So in September 2021, the Atlanta City Council voted yes on a plan to destroy at least 85 acres of Atlanta's South River Forest, which has been renamed the Weelaunee Forest in honor of the Muskogee people from whom the land was stolen in the 1800s. This is land that was, like I said, originally belonged to the Muskogee Creek people during the 1900s through about the 1990s. It was used by the city. This is city-owned land to force incarcerated people to work on city projects. And this is land that is in a majority Black area of DeKalb County, really sort of disinvested land where, there are various waste producing sites. There's a children's prison, there's an adult prison. This is land that has really been disinvested in by the city and the county. And so this plan, if constructed, Cop City would destroy much of this forest land and this green space that's really critical for the surrounding area and for, whatever city you're in, forest land is important for all of us as climate disaster is already here. And it would replace it with this massive, noisy, toxic police training facility, wiping out this forest that is really, crucial to preventing flooding or to reducing flooding, to lowering temperatures, that sort of thing. And so to really contextualize that, this is, think to 2021, this is 1 year after the 2020 uprisings where people were in the streets, the biggest nationwide uprisings in decades or in history of, in the history of the US. Just 1 year after that, you have the council voting to destroy, between 85 and 380 acres of forest land, and to use that land to create a police training facility that would be on, a space that is bigger than either the facilities of, Los Angeles or New York City. And so this is called Cop City because this is sort of what it was branded as by organizers, because the plans for Cop City include a mock city, so a mock school, a mock parking lot, playground, that sort of thing, where cops will actually be able to, train in this sort of simulated environment of what a city looks like. So as soon as this was proposed in spring of 2021, there was massive resistance. People were knocking doors, canvassing neighborhoods. A bunch of different organizations came out against the proposal. People were marching in the streets. They were doing direct action. You can see here, they were circulating petitions. They were protesting outside of council members' houses. And at that point, they were already bringing in national attention. I think really significantly, and I think Kiana's going to talk a little bit about this later, there was really significant opposition from a lot of the local neighborhoods and areas that are surrounding this site. So a bunch of areas in Southeast Atlanta where this site is, were putting out statements saying, we don't want this thing. Like, nobody here wants this. We don't want this built in our community. We love having this park. We love having this forest land. We need it. Don't do this. And so, you know, the community was really coming out in support. I think something really special about this movement has been that it's brought together abolitionists, you know, prison and police abolitionists, environmental justice folks, people working against gentrification, mutual aid groups, youth advocacy organizations, and then, you know, like I said, even some of the more typically apolitical organizations or, you know, formations like local neighborhood associations, who you don't often see taking controversial stances. So there was this really sort of big tent movement that's only gotten bigger. And so when it came time for the final vote in September 2021, after all this advocacy over the summer, organizers mobilized people for over 17 hours of public comment. So it actually took 2 days for city council to listen to all of the public comments, you know, where you had people voicing their opposition to the proposal, saying, you know, please don't do this. We did an analysis of those call-ins, because at that time it was, you know, still while they were remote, so people were calling to leave their comment. There were about 1,100 total calls. 70% of those were against Cop City. About 30% were pro Cop City, and of that 30%, there was a really clear demographic. There were a couple really clear demographics, and they were cops, firefighters who would also actually have space at this facility. And then people from an area of Northeast Atlanta. I think I saw a couple people from Atlanta on this call, called Buckhead. And if you know anything about Buckhead, or if you don't, I'll tell you, Buckhead is really sort of the heart of the white economic power structure in Atlanta. And at the time that all of these conversations were happening, Buckhead was sort of leading this secession effort to secede, to take this rich white area of Northeast Atlanta, secede from the city, take about 40% of the tax base with them. And this was all over the issue of crime, saying, you know, crime is so out of control during this pandemic. You know, we're seeing really, you know, when they say that, what they mean is we're seeing Black people in our neighborhoods. We're seeing Black children selling water on the streets. You know, of course, I think we saw a lot of sort of inflated crime narratives during the pandemic. And so this was the breakdown of the calls. Despite all of that opposition, despite the fact that, you know, the only residents that supported it were supporting something that would not be built in their neighborhood, when it came time to vote for the facility, all but 4 of city council members said yes. They voted in favor of it. And they really didn't even discuss the public comment at all. So you have 2 days of people, you know, pleading with city council, saying, you know, don't do this, we don't want this. And when the time comes to vote, they're like, push their button, say yes. One of those yes votes includes our now current mayor, Andre Dickens, who now, as the mayor, has really been leading the charge. And so I think you come up against sort of an obvious question here, which is, how did this happen, right? I think that, you know, probably in this group, we all know sort of how politics works a little more, but, you know, you'd like to believe that if, you know, thousands of constituents, you know, whether it was through public comment, through calling into council members, you know, through the various marches, petitions, if all those people say don't do something, you would hope to think, you know, at least there would be some pause before we make this thing happen, that, you know, maybe council members would listen. And of course, that's not what we saw here. Instead, what we saw is what I think is sort of the functioning of the prison industrial complex in Atlanta, where this really powerful mix of actors, including media, corporations, people who work for the city government, and police, really coming together to push this proposal through during this really critical moment of instability following the uprising. And so we don't have time to go through all of those actors, although we can, it sounds like some resources will be shared around that. But I want to just quickly discuss a couple of them to give you an idea of really how anti-democratic this proposal was. So starting with the media. To give a little bit of context, the proposal for Cop City originally came before the entire city council in mid-August of 2021, so about a month before they actually approved it. It had made its way through city council committees at that point, and at each point, there was really significant public opposition. But even still, at this August vote, people expected it to go through. They thought, well, this is what the city council is doing. But because of this really significant opposition, the movement, and the fact that the proponents of the proposal had not actually reached out to many of the local county commissioners where the site is, the council actually narrowly voted just to delay the ordinance a couple of weeks. So they said, we'll come back to this later. So the day after that August vote to delay the Cop City proposal, our main media outlet in Atlanta, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, you can see, this picture here. Their editorial board released this editorial that you see on the screen, and it says crime waves should spur action on center. And in it, they write, crime will not politely observe the delay. Criminals are going to ply their trade. It's going to take a cost in property, public fears, and even lives. So this, really intense crime fear mongering. And data later showed that there was a discrete increase in homicides during the pandemic, which we can attribute to much of the isolation, the mental health crises, and the extreme prevalence of guns during the pandemic. And that was really the only rise in crime. Most of the other categories actually came down. But anyway, they say it's no exaggeration to say that better trained police officers are going to save lives during routine encounters with the public. So they're sort of putting this social justice spin on it, saying, actually, this is better for everybody. This is better for the people who will interact with police. And they say this despite the fact that the cop who killed and murdered Rayshard Brooks, Garrett Ralph, himself had taken over 2,000 hours worth of training. So he had a ton of training. And one of the people who was killed that sparked these nationwide uprisings was killed by an officer who had over 2,000 hours of training. And so we can talk about this, but training is not the issue here. This was not even close to the first time that the AJC had published in support of Cop City. They had actually been running pieces for months, about how crime is out of control, how this is, incredibly necessary. When you look at who's writing these pieces, it's the former police chief, the CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation, the board chair of the Atlanta Police Foundation. The media is really in bed with sort of the police interests of the city. And at the same time, the AJC is not publishing any articles against Cop City, despite this really massive local opposition. And I think that's really important. And, probably as many of you know, in the war context, media really has the ability to shape and manufacture consent, for so much of the violence that comes at the hands of the state by feeding people certain narratives, by telling people that they should be scared. And so, this really matters in the context of Atlanta. And so when we ask, why this coverage from the AJC, you can, of course, look at sort of the big picture fact that, corporate media loves clicks, that drives revenue. The corporate media ecosystem is really reliant on ads. And so juicy stories about crime and how nobody is safe, of course, drives a lot of clicks. We can dig even a little deeper and we can see that the AJC is owned by Cox Enterprises. The CEO of Cox Enterprises is Alex Taylor, and Alex Taylor was asked by the mayor at the time to lead the $60 million fundraising campaign for Cop City. The Cox Enterprises Foundation has also donated $10 million to Cop City. And so we have this instance where our main media outlet that is continually manufacturing consent for Cop City is owned by the people who are funding and pushing the fundraising campaign for Cop City. And as you can see in one of these tweets that has been covered really at length now, they rarely disclose this relationship in their coverage. And I know I'm moving really fast, I'm sorry. But the Atlanta Committee for Progress, which owns the AJC, back up. So Cox Enterprises owns the AJC. Their board, the CEO of Cox Enterprises was also the board chair at the time of the Atlanta Committee for Progress. The Atlanta Committee for Progress is made up of all of these various private corporations who all have their own stake in policing, because again, during 2020, 2021, it was a time of instability. It was a time where windows were getting smashed. Corporations were saying, hey, you need to crack down on this stuff because this is not serving our interests. And so, you have these bodies of really powerful corporate actors coming together. And the Atlanta Committee for Progress is putting out statements saying, we support Cop City. Of course, they didn't call it Cop City. And we're saying, we're going to work with the mayor to make this happen. Okay, so the corporate-owned media is pushing for this project, not publishing anything against Cop City, publishing in favor. The ACP, the Atlanta Committee for Progress, all these corporations are lining up behind it. Another really important actor that sort of makes up this broader complex in Atlanta, sort of the power system, is the Atlanta Police Foundation. They're a really important actor in this story. Police foundations are these private, nonprofit organizations that operate in many major US cities. They raise funds for local police departments. They put money towards a lot of the things that cities might not feel as comfortable putting money towards. Various forms of technology, surveillance equipment. The Atlanta Police Foundation runs this network of surveillance cameras in the city that makes Atlanta the most surveilled city in the country. And they often run PR for the city police. And as you can see, these are a couple of the corporations that are on the board of the Atlanta Police Foundation. I'm sure you notice a lot of overlap between these corporations and the corporations that are part of the Atlanta Committee for Progress. So you can see this sort of picture coming together where you really have a set of ruling class actors that are invested in a certain form of security and stabilization for themselves, even as the people are in the street saying, hey, this is not working for us. People are getting evicted and criminalized out of their housing left and right. People can't afford to live. Our hospitals are closing while our jails are opening. And so, you can see this sort of divide coming into play. So the Atlanta Police Foundation, and I'm going to try to wrap up because I think I'm over my 15 minutes at this point. They had been working since at least 2017 to push this proposal, but it wasn't until 2021 when our then mayor created this advisory committee. You can read about this in the piece that's going to get sent out, but basically they just sort of gave this rubber stamp to everything the Police Foundation had already done. I want to zoom in on this one moment really quickly. So in June 2021, this proposal has to work its way through our city council committees, and it went through the finance committee, and it was coming up for a vote in front of the finance committee. Really important time. So right before this committee vote, on June 13th, 2021, I'm going to pull out a couple things from this, so you don't have to read it all. So right before this finance committee vote, the CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation, this group that had been pushing this proposal, sends an email to one of the mayor's sort of right-hand guys, was really responsible for a lot of this, key partner in pushing it through. And he references this email that he's attached from a prominent CEO. And he's saying that, hey, I'm talking to a lot of these CEOs, these power players in Atlanta. They're really frustrated by the crime surge, the lack of support for public safety. He says he knows from a conversation with a council member, from this person he's emailing, that a bunch of council members are, quote, looking for a cover to vote for this. So council members know that the people are not in favor of this and that they need a cover in order to vote for it. And here, the Atlanta Police Foundation CEO is saying this in this email. He's saying, that's right, they do need a cover because people don't want it, but the corporations do, the state actors do. But he says, to give in on this just because, the people don't want it would show how weak they are. The mayor needs to step up. The mayor needs to see this thing through. He forwards this email from this anonymous CEO who lives in Buckhead. And you can remember Buckhead is sort of the site of the secession movement, this white power structure of Atlanta. And this Buckhead CEO is saying, the current situation must stop, or I and others are going to turn all of our support for the Buckhead cityhood movement. So this is essentially a threat of white flight, saying, hey, give us what we want, or we're going to take all of our tax dollars with us, and you're going to be left in the lurch. And so you better build Cop City. It doesn't matter what the people think; it matters what we think. And so again, I just want to be really clear. This is a threat. And so I'm going to pause there in order to turn it over to Kiana. But I'm going to share one other screen really quickly. Just to give sort of a visual of some of the things we just talked about. Can you see this right now?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So this is obviously looks a little bit insane. But just to put together, these are really the actors who made this happen. So you have these government actors who are, working on council, whipping the votes, talking to all the corporations. You have the media actors who are giving placements, manufacturing consent. They're tied into these corporations. You have these various corporate actors who are working through various formations, whether it's through the Atlanta Police Foundation, the Atlanta Committee for Progress, and then you have police themselves. And, as people, and I think Kiana will probably talk about this, at every step of the way from the very beginning, anytime people have showed up to protest against this thing, police have been there to quash that dissent. And so I think, what I hope folks will take away from this is that, in the same way that the military industrial complex sort of makes a world without war unthinkable because of all of the various economic and state interests behind it, we have this set of corporate and state interests in Atlanta, in all of our cities, in our country, across the world, that are making a world without policing unthinkable, that basically create and manufacture the perceived necessity of policing in order to maintain this, vastly unequal status quo. All right, that was a lot of talking. I'm sorry, but I hope that was helpful context, and I'll turn it over to you, Kiana.
That was amazing, Micah. Really, really great synopsis in a very short time, considering what you had to present. And where I will pick up right there is just to continue this talk about the Atlanta Police Foundation being run by corporations. And what the Atlanta Police Foundation does, as do all police foundations, is allow corporate interests to militarize police and weaponize police against minority communities. Here in the city of Atlanta, Southeast Atlanta, where I'm from, born and raised, which is also unincorporated DeKalb County, which is East Atlanta Village, Gresham Park, Kirkwood, all of that area is unincorporated DeKalb County. It's also Southeast Atlanta. We have been historically one of the largest Black communities in the city of Atlanta, which also is a part of unincorporated DeKalb County in that section. And we have been the targets of environmental racism and racialized capitalism for quite some time. So when you think about racialized capitalism, you have to look at the fact that the Atlanta Police Foundation is comprised of heads of major corporations. These major corporations that are part of the Atlanta Police Foundation are also some of the same major corporations that supported an omnibus voter suppression bill, SB 202, back in 2021. Some of those corporations you saw, Micah put them up on the screen. Chick-fil-A, everybody loves Chick-fil-A. Waffle House, even the waffles are in on it. UPS, Coca-Cola, Bank of America, Truist Bank, Wells Fargo. And let me say about Wells Fargo that Wells Fargo has been doing the most harm to Black communities for the longest time. Wells Fargo was the #1 subprime lender to Black families. Wells Fargo repossessed more homes than any other banking corporation, homes of Black people. But let me not get off on that part of the tangent because this is specifically about Cop City. But certainly Wells Fargo's hand in repossessing homes does tie into the bigger picture, which is a huge picture and web woven by intersectionality here in this Black community. So that community where they are proposing to build Cop City has not been hit super hard by gentrification yet, but gentrification is spreading that way. And one thing that has been shown is that when facilities like Cop City are built, gentrification, that process is sped up 10% even. You will see gentrification happen much faster once you have a police training facility because white people who are capitalists historically feel safer with cops around because that allows for the repression of Black people. So what Cop City has been labeled as is a state-of-the-art law enforcement training facility, public safety training facility where the police officers and firefighters would be trained. There has been very little talk about what would be done for firefighters at this training facility. As a matter of fact, the majority of the plan is for law enforcement. And when you look at the things that are in the plan, like urban warfare training, think about what the word urban connotes. These days, the word urban is synonymous with Black. Urban warfare. you are going to practice warfare on Black bodies. And how will you do that? You'll do that with the thousands of surplus military equipment that Georgia has received over the years. I mean, just in 2020, from 2018 to 2020, Georgia received more than 2,700 military night rifles, night vision goggles, laser gun sights, armored vehicles. You see Fulton County SWAT driving around in armored vehicles. You see the city of Atlanta partnering with the Fulton County SWAT on a task force, and they're driving armored vehicles down residential streets. Georgia, as a state, from 2009 to 2018, received $43.5 million worth of firearms, vehicles, and military gear. Why would a local law enforcement agency need military gear? Because with GILEE, G-I-L-E-E, the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, they actually run law enforcement executive development and trainings. And what they do is militarize police departments. The Israeli Defense Force is a part of GILEE. That is also in partnership with Georgia State University Police. Why in the world would university police need to be involved in military trainings? But GILEE, through 450 programs that have reached over 33,000 law enforcement executives in 25 states and 25 countries, continues to militarize local law enforcement. When we look at the geography here and we think about what's been happening in this community in Southeast Atlanta, environmental racism, economic injustice have played a huge part in this community. From the time that I was a little girl, I remember having landfills around the corner from my house. And I remember being able to smell the landfill when I would go to the grocery store with my grandmother, which was less than half a mile away. It wasn't even maybe it was a quarter mile from my house, but we could smell the landfill. Where those landfills used to be, directly behind that land is where they want to build Cop City. So you want to take down the South River Forest. The South River Forest is 381 acres of forest land and the largest urban forest in the southeastern United States. The South River Forest is the greatest natural resource that we have in Southeast Atlanta and unincorporated DeKalb County. Honestly, it's the largest natural resource that we have in the state of Georgia. The South River Forest is actually the headwater of the Ocmulgee River, which goes down into the Altamaha, and it spans like from right here where we are. It actually starts in East Point and goes all the way down to South Georgia to Darien. Here, the South River watershed is a very important resource for us. We depend on it for our drinking water. We depend on it for our livelihood here in Southeast Atlanta, the part that is unincorporated DeKalb. And our water here is already contaminated with lead from an existing gun range that is on the property that is proposed for Cop City to be built on. And let me just give a little bit more of the history of that land. That land is originally Muskogee Creek land. It was taken from the Muskogee people. They were driven out in order for slaves to be put on that land. That land also was the site of a prison farm. When you think about Indigenous people and Black people being victims of capitalism, this is what we see: racialized capitalism. The Muskogee people were driven out in order for slaves to till that land. Profit over people, racialized capitalism. Now here in this same area, after the prison farm, on that same land, you want to build a militarized training facility. You want local law enforcement to practice urban warfare. They would be practicing military operations on urban terrain there at Cop City. So many people say, you know what, officers need more training because so much has been happening. But as Micah stated, officers get well over 10,000 hours of training. So is it really a training issue? It's not a training issue. It's an issue of police culture. What we see with Cop City is that it is a direct response to the people making their voices heard in 2020 after the murders of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. The people in Buckhead got very antsy and said, hey, we don't want that crime wave coming here. We want to make sure that Buckhead stays Buckhead and that Buckhead remains exclusive and that those people cannot tarnish Buckhead. So Buckhead threatened to leave the city of Atlanta if the city of Atlanta did not respond. And Cop City is the compromise for Buckhead not being able to secede. Because in that agreement that goes between Black electeds and elites here and the white establishment, that silent agreement says, hey, I'll keep these undesirables over here. We know how to control them. All we have to do is put more police in their area, put police in their faces. They won't go to Buckhead. They'll stay right where they are. We will make sure that they won't be able to disturb your peace in Buckhead. That's why you saw in the emails that Micah presented, there was some very strong language there suggesting exactly what I just said. So what we're saying is not conjecture. It's things that we have uncovered through research. A lot of emails have been uncovered since then, where we see even more of the corruption between the APF and the city of Atlanta. When it comes down to it, the city of Atlanta is in violation even of its own land use ordinance in the building of Cop City. They are violating the Clean Water Act because silt runoff in the water right there at Entrenchment Creek and the South River is well over the allowable amounts. The lead pollution is already there. That's something that is a violation of the Environmental Protection Department standards. The city of Atlanta, Mayor Andre Dickens, are not thinking about what is best for the people of Southwest Atlanta or the people of Georgia in consideration of this project. Mayor Andre Dickens is simply thinking about his legacy. He's thinking about keeping Buckhead as a part of the city of Atlanta, and he is thinking about corporate dollars going into his own passion projects. There is not one policy initiative that Mayor Andre Dickens has proposed since he's been in office. He's very weak on policy, but this vanity project is he has chosen to take up and to let be his leading project as mayor so that he can stay in the good graces of the APF, because what we see is that police foundations are powerful because we allow them to be. Police foundations are powerful because of the corporate interests that control them. But if we don't allow these corporate interests to take over what we know to be the largest and greatest natural resource here in the city of Atlanta and in the Southeastern United States. It is the largest urban forest in the Southeastern United States. If we can stand up against this, then we can show not only the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia, but we can show this country and the entire world that when people band together and they stand up for what's right, they can defeat those corporate interests. Those corporate interests are the 1% that control the 99 because they get to impress upon legislators how to make laws that affect the rest of us. Those corporate interests are the same bad actors that are behind many of the bad bills that get passed in all of our states. So when we think about this project, one thing that we need to remember is that it's not about crime prevention, because if it was about crime prevention, then the city of Atlanta would be investing resources into its communities. The city of Atlanta would be looking at the root causes of crime, housing instability, food insecurity, lack of education, lack of childcare, poor health care. Those things are the root causes of crime, but none of those are being addressed by the city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta just allowed the closing of a major trauma center. And we just had a mass shooting today in the city of Atlanta. And there is only one trauma center to service those people. We have a real crisis on our hands, but it's not one that needs to be remedied by more cops or a militarized training facility. And just to let you all know some of the organizing efforts that we have been engaged in. One of the main things that we have been doing is pursuing every legal angle against the lease for Cop City, because there are many, many holes in that lease and many things that make that lease not really legal. And we have been pursuing those things. Unfortunately, we have been shot down by corrupt judges here in the state of Georgia. So we are in a very heavy legal battle for that lease to be canceled. In addition to that, we keep pressure on the City of Atlanta City Council and Mayor Andre Dickens. We show up where Mayor Dickens is, we bird dog him, and we ask him very important questions. We do have conversations with City Council members to ask them if they would consider offering a resolution to cancel the lease, because they can. We also organize solidarity movements. StopCopCitySolidarity.org is a website where you can go and find what you can do in your area to stand in solidarity here with us. And more than anything, we continue to educate people about what Cop City is and what it really means for the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia, and beyond. I hope that I have been able to answer any questions that you might have, or give you a bit more insight into Cop City and what it really means for us. Oh, and the thing that I cannot forget to mention is that one of the other reasons that I am so staunchly opposed to Cop City is the alarming amount of murders by Georgia police officers of innocent victims. There have been, in 2020 alone, there were 40 murders by police officers. And the families who I work with all have children who were murdered by police officers. Just in 2021, young Leadon Boykins was murdered by a state trooper who did an illegal pit maneuver and caused his death. But the state of Georgia will not even consider Leadon Boykins a victim, because the car that he was in was driven by someone who the police had pulled over. Or I don't even know if they really pulled the person over. They were just following him, and then went up to the car, smashed out his windows. The driver called the police, pulled off. Officers gave chase and did a pit maneuver, which they should not have done because there were children in the car. But those are the things that I think about when I think about more police. When I think about our comrade, Manny, who was murdered just in January this year, who was sitting with his hands up without a weapon, as the police claimed, but shot 57 times. 57 times he was shot for simply sitting in defense of that forest, sitting to stop bulldozers from clear cutting the forest, just sitting in a meditative position, and he was gunned down. When I think about those cases, I'm very clear that we don't need more police, and the police don't need more training. The police need a change in culture. So I hope, again, that this has been informative for you. We are definitely happy to take any questions, and I am thankful to the War Resisters International Network for having us on tonight.
Well, thank you, Reverend Kiana and Micah. How powerful, how upsetting, how wrong all this is. Yeah, we sure appreciate you being here. And so, everyone, we have some time for Q&A, and the way we do this is, if you look at your response, your reactions button below, you can choose one that raises your hand electronically, right? Many of you know what I'm talking about. And so what we do is, if you click on raise your hand through the reaction button, we'll take people one at a time as their hands are raised, and for as much time as we have, at least. And so go ahead and do that. And I would please ask that you do have a question. You can make a comment, but please keep it brief, so we give everybody a chance to speak, and so we can keep our presenters talking to us a little bit. Okay, so I see a hand up, and it's Laura Mays. And go ahead, Laura. You're muted, Laura.
people ask us when we're on the streets with our Cop City signs in Asheville, well, how does this affect us? Is the Atlanta police going to train there? This is an issue that's only in Georgia and especially Atlanta, you know, because they're violent. And I appreciate the article you shared because I have a sister who lives in Atlanta. I went to high school in Atlanta. That article is my sister's soundbite. Which is embarrassing as a family member, but anyway, could you speak to the wider pitch here of the US and how it influences us?
Oh, definitely. And I did respond to you in the chat, Laura. I'm sorry, I had just seen it. But what I will say is that officers from other states, other cities, even other countries would be trained at Cop City. So what has been estimated so far is that around 40% of those officers trained there would be from other places. That's one more way that the APF would gain revenue because those law enforcement agencies would pay for their officers to be trained at Cop City. When I mentioned the IDF, I just want people to really understand what the Israeli Defense Force does, how they train. There were several viral videos that went around during Ramadan showing the IDF beating Palestinians while they prayed. They were simply praying. They went into mosques. They went into houses of worship. Whether they believe the same thing or not, they don't respect even a house of worship. And when you think about that level of brutality, do you think that that level of brutality should be one that is employed to train the officers that ride up and down your street, that perform traffic stops for your neighbors? Do you think that those are the people who you would want to call and respond to an emergency?
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly. This is, I think there are, besides like all of the ways in which there will be literal partnerships between these agencies, this is a pattern, and I talk about this a little bit in the article that was shared of, so after the uprising of the 60s, there were these riot bills that were built that essentially allowed the military to simulate these various scenarios and prepare. Yeah, there's the documentary Riots Bill USA. And right now, in the wake of these 2020 uprisings, and even in the past 10 years, as there's been various mass protests and mass movements, cities are moving to make these sorts of facilities. So there's Cop Academy in Chicago. Hawaii has proposed a massive facility like this that actually has been paused for now. There's multiple proposals happening in Texas right now. Pittsburgh, I want to say. There was a proposal that just got stopped in Michigan for a massive National Guard expansion. And so that's all just to say that there are, for one, these are popping up all over the place. And in part of the opposition that stopped the Hawaii facility, they were referencing some of what was happening here. And so I think for one, we can say, movement here impacts movement there, and vice versa. For two, I think that, even if we're not talking about the facility, looking at the repression tactics, I think, is really important, because right now people here are being charged with domestic terrorism for standing up against Cop City. And, it's the abolitionists and the anarchists today, but tomorrow it's the reproductive justice organizers, it's the voting rights organizers. This is their playbook, to basically quash dissent. And so that's why I think, in addition to everything that's been said, I think they test the playbook in different cities. Right now they're testing it in Atlanta, and it will come to Nashville, and it's probably in Nashville already in various ways. Yeah.
Thank you both, and thank you, Laura. Paul, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wonder, I would like to hear of these direct actions that people have been doing. I mean, to me, to hear that a protester in the woods was just executed is just, just something that we absolutely have to pay attention to. And I'm just wondering what people are doing in terms of direct action, and I just mentioned that you've got your hands full, and but it would be interesting if we could find out what military companies make that equipment that might be coming in there, or that has come in the past. You know, the armed personnel carriers and things like that. It would be helpful to us in terms of trying to get an angle on some of those military contractors and linking them to this whole atrocity. But the main thing I'd like to know, what types of things are people doing on the ground, you know, in addition to this incredible legal and legislative work that you're trying to do?
Well, during our most recent week of action, one of the things that we did was target some of the corporations that are a part of the APF and that fund them, one of them being Norfolk Southern. And we know that Norfolk Southern is a company that has been able to get away with such egregious human rights violations. I mean, look at the things that have been happening as of late, just here in the United States with Norfolk Southern. And what we did was wrote a letter to the CEOs of those companies, and we delivered those letters. There were small groups of us who went into the corporations, and we asked to see the CEO if we could deliver the letter. When we went into Norfolk Southern, we were not allowed to see the CEO. As soon as we walked in, they called security on us. They called the police on us. But what we did was stand in the lobby and very loudly read the letter. And when we read the letter so loudly, of course, it drew attention from people who were coming and going. Even people outside could hear us. And just to make a note about the response time of the police department, we were able to read that entire letter and do some chanting in the lobby of Norfolk Southern before the police ever came. As a matter of fact, we were gone from the area by the time the police got there. So I don't know what's really going on with the police and the training that they have, but they couldn't get there to stop us from reading our letter and making our voices heard. Petitions are another form of direct action. I mean, we have a petition on color of change. We have a petition on defend the Atlanta forest. There's a petition on the South River Watershed Alliance. We are doing a lot of canvassing. Canvassing is a huge part of our direct action plan, because as I said before, we have to educate people, because a lot of people just hear the words training facility and they're like, oh, forget about it. Police need more training. They're awful. But they don't they don't understand the type of training that will be happening. When people hear the word training, most of the people that I talk to, people are thinking about de-escalation training. People are thinking about the fact that there have been so many police murders as of late and saying, hey, they need to be trained. They need some better training. So yeah, why don't you want them to have it? And then we have to explain to them that that is not the type of training that's happening at Cop City. As a matter of fact, Georgia already has GPSTC, GPSTC, the Georgia, wait, let me make sure that I have it right. The Georgia Public Safety Training Institute. They already have that down in, it's not even South Georgia. It's not considered that far because it's a little bit past Warner Robins in that area. It's in Forsyth, Georgia. It's a huge facility that they could have this state-of-the-art training because it's already going on there. We also have an FBI training facility here in the state of Georgia. Like, there are places that law enforcement can train. I'm just trying to understand why they need to destroy 381 acres of forest to do this. And in a predominantly Black area that has been targeted for environmental racism. And when you think about environment, think about health outcomes. When you think about health outcomes, think about children and lead poisoning and what that does to them as far as their education and development. Think about the rates of autism when you think about lead levels in water. And consider the fact that right around the area where they're proposing to build Cop City, there are 2 schools located there. Think about our right to peace and clean air. Now, if they had kept the original plans for Cop City, which would have included a bomb testing facility, can you imagine being a 3rd grader outside at recess and you hear bombs going off? It's already bad enough that they hear the firing now from the current firing range that's there.
Right.
Like literally, I just moved into a new home on Monday. Before Monday, where I live, we could hear those gunshots very, very clearly. My 8-year-old woke up every night for more than a year because of those gunshots. My husband was perturbed when we first moved there because he was saying, oh my goodness, I thought we moved into a nice neighborhood. And we had no idea that that gun range was still open, because that gun range was open when we were children. When we were children, that gun range was open, and we thought that everything there at the old prison farm had been shut down, only to find out that the firing range is still there. They still have 2 youth detention centers on the other side. There is a lot to unpack when you talk about Cop City, this area of Southeast Atlanta and South DeKalb County, and how we are really affected by this facility. Atlanta being the most surveilled city, that is not a joke. We are. Motorola, in partnership with the APF, has provided so many cameras on the street. Do you know that local businesses are being pressured to give their surveillance footage, to actually allow their feed to go directly to the police department? In the Pittsburgh neighborhood of Southwest Atlanta, there is one convenience store owner who was threatened 2 days ago by police, saying that if he did not allow the feed from his surveillance camera to go directly to the police department, they would shut him down. And through Atlanta Connect and Operation Shield, these programs that encourage homeowners with Ring doorbell cameras, Vivint doorbell cameras, any type of digital doorbell camera to send their feeds directly to the police department, that's more surveillance. There is nowhere that you go in the city of Atlanta that you are not being watched. And why? Why? Why do they want to watch us that much, but you won't even respond when we call the police? In my experience, police have never prevented crime. They have only responded after the crime was committed. And when a real crime is committed, when somebody steals your car, let me know what the police do for you. Tell me how that investigation goes. My neighbor had a neighbor, got his car stolen. What's the police doing? Not much of anything. So Cop City is definitely not the answer to what they perceive to be the causes of crime here.
Yeah. I know there are a couple other questions, so I just want to add 2 other direct action type things really quickly. One is, of course, this is probably what people have seen coverage of, is that people have been living in the forest since, since almost immediately after the facility was approved, and actually doing, land defense in the righteous tradition of land defense. So that was when Tortuguita was killed. The autopsy showed that they were likely killed with their hands like this, bullet holes through their hands, entry wound, exit wound. So that there have been people who have, actually been doing this direct land defense. And then some of the other direct actions, in addition to all the things Kiana mentioned, is that people have been putting a lot of pressure on the contractors. So both here in Atlanta and across the country, people showing up to contractors' offices and saying, hey, you are funding this murderous project, or you are, building, or, with the corporations funding this murderous project, stop. And they successfully got Reeves Young, who was a major contractor on the project, to pull out. There was originally going to be $60 million pledged from private money to this facility, and they're having a hard time raising it. And that's because of so much of the direct action putting pressure on these corporations. And so they're actually now asking for more money from the city because they haven't been able to raise all the money that they've said from the private corporation.
Yes, definitely. The rallies that we have led and the marches. So one of our more successful marches during the week of action, we marched around downtown Atlanta to the sites of some of the corporations that fund the Atlanta Police Foundation, like Georgia Pacific. We also stopped at Georgia State University, part of their campus, because one of their professors is a part of the Atlanta Police Foundation. We went to AT&T. We actually went to the APF headquarters, but as we marched, we would stop in front of each place and get on the bullhorn and tell the people walking by exactly what is going on, like why we're here, who these people are. Like Micah just said, let the public know that, hey, they are funding the APF. I literally tell everybody I know, because these people for some reason won't stop eating Chick-fil-A. I'm like, stop it with the cop chicken. Just stop it with the cop chicken. And Waffle House is the number 2. And I'm like, yo, the waffles are in on it too. No, no cop chicken, no wavy waffles. Like, no, those waffles are not with you. Those waffles are really for the opposition. We don't need that. And it's like, no Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola, to be a corporation that was founded in Atlanta, Georgia, Coca-Cola is always on the wrong side of these things. And it bothers me so much, because all of these corporations, the first thing they want to do is get a Black face to talk about how charitable they are. And let me mention now, in that vein, Ken, I should have sent you an updated bio. I quit New Georgia Project because they take money from the Arthur Blank Foundation, which funds the APF. There is no way in hell you were going to have me walking around talking about New Georgia Project, and New Georgia Project is a part of the problem. I could not do it in good conscience, because one thing that I see with organizations like the Arthur Blank Foundation is that they heavily fund projects like the APF. They have funded so much gentrification on the west side of Atlanta. They are even giving money for cop housing, subsidized housing for cops in the Pittsburgh section of Atlanta. So the cops just got a raise. They get a $500 stipend for reporting on Black communities, and you're now going to give them subsidized housing. Meanwhile, teachers can barely make a living and afford food, but that's who you want to give subsidized housing to. But Arthur Blank Foundation, as well as the Atlanta Hawks Foundation, they do a lot of funding with the APF, but then they'll turn around and give money to New Georgia Project or the NAACP and say, hey, we care about Black people and we care about your right to vote. We want to make sure that you vote, but we're also going to fund the Republicans who just put this voter suppression bill through. They do it all the time. So there are a lot of bad actors here. A large part of what we do is definitely raising awareness for that. Actions at their sites, we try to shut them down if we can. I mean, if we had our way, we would just flood the lobbies of every bank that's involved. Like, nope, go bank at a credit union. Take your money somewhere else. Like, this money ain't even your money, really. They're playing around with your money. Go take your money somewhere else where it's really going to work for you. Because at the end of the day, these corporations only keep money within their cipher. They funnel that money and recycle it around within themselves to make sure that they maintain the upper hand on law enforcement. And that way they're able to weaponize law enforcement against anyone who they believe dissents against them.
Well, you all are giving us a class, aren't you? Thank you. So powerful. We have 2 more people with their hands raised, and let's call it quits after that because we're almost 10 minutes after the hour. David Hartsborough, please go ahead.
Thanks so very much for your very important work in trying to stop Cop City. Maybe I missed something, but is the occupation continuing in the forest? And the second is, how do you envision people all across the country that really support your effort to really give support that's going to make a difference?
I'll just say, so back in March, toward the end of March, I won't go into it all because I know we're short on time, but basically they're part of this forest land. A chunk of it is owned by the city. That's where they're trying to build Cop City. A chunk of it is owned by the county. And that county-owned land has been parkland. They're actually currently trying to give it away to a developer, and that's a whole nother fight. But currently, it's still public parkland. It's where a lot of the camping has happened, where a lot of the movement has happened. And they recognize that it was sort of this crucial hub of Stop Cop City organizing. And so at the end of March of this year, they shut down the park. They said, oh, there are booby traps all over the park. It's not safe for people to go to, which was, complete lies. And they have, raided it and essentially pushed everybody out. And so, the camp has been raided before, they've pushed people out before, and people have always come back. That could very well happen again. But right now there's nobody living in the forest. To the second question, for one, I would definitely go to stopcopcitysolidarity.org. There's a lot of information on the various corporations and contractors that have, sites all over the country where, that are good places to exert pressure. For two, I would say donating to organizations, including the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. That is sort of the bail fund that has been supporting the protesters who have been charged with domestic terrorism. And I can drop their information in the chat. But yeah, I think, if hosting fundraisers for them, hosting fundraisers for community movement builders, which Kiana works for, they've really been sort of, at the forefront of the movement for a long time. Yeah, those are the things that come to mind. Putting pressure on, on places from where you are, but then also, raising money, sending money to the orgs who are, facing a lot of repression.
Thank you.
Yes, our next week of action is June 24th through July 1st. So if you can, June 24th through July 1st, actually come to Atlanta for that week of action.
Thank you for that. Okay, Priscilla Wren, you're going to be our last question here, so please go ahead.
It's got to be a good one, right? First of all, thank you so much. And you all have outlined so aptly, I think, what is going on in so many urban areas. I'm from Boston, and this is not an unfamiliar thing I'm hearing. I'm sorry that it seems like it's a bit more ramped up where you all are than where we are here. But I think we have a different sort of city council. We're blessed, let me tell you. But anyway, with all that said, I'm curious about two other types of people that I'm curious of their interest in what you're doing, and that would be Stacey Abrams. From up north, we hear how wonderful things about Stacey, but I'm not from there, so I'm not telling you that, anyway. So I put that out, and then I just quickly looked on my phone that you've got a couple of Unitarian churches in Atlanta, and they historically, are always so concerned with social justice issues, and I just wondered if they are part of this effort. And thirdly, Kiana, it was music to my ears to hear how astute you are with the the financial underpinnings of so much of what is going on. And if you could just bottle it, please, and sprinkle it all over the cities, that would be great. But that's truly the one piece of it that is unfortunate, but wherever we are, whatever the development we have around us is due to somebody's financing of it, whatever the it is. And as I continue to educate myself, most of us were not schooled well in history. I count myself as one of them, but I'm making efforts to change that. And it's just, a systemic thing that's been going on for 4 centuries, like a long time. So anyway, I leave you with that, and I'm just curious if those other two groups of people might be also involved.
Okay, so first, Stacey Abrams, I got 2 words: Roosevelt Foundation. That's all I'll say. And then, because she is completely silent on this issue. She's really completely silent on this issue. And when I was working for New Georgia Project, actually, she had contacted the CEO when she found out that we were doing some organizing around Cop City. And actually, all we were doing was participating in the March 9th rally against police repression and police terror. And Stacey Abrams asked the CEO, like, why would you do that? Because this makes it look like I'm standing against Cop City. But Stacey Abrams is all for cops. And I would say that she probably would be in favor of Cop City if she wanted to come out and say something. And you can just listen to any of her campaign speeches when she talked to Black men, when they talked about police violence and police terror. She made it very clear that she is in favor of cops and the prison industrial complex. And then the Universal Unitarians, I don't know that we have any UU clergy members in our clergy coalition. I am one of the members of Clergy United Against Cop City, and we have not had any who have identified in our coalition, but we do have a wonderful interfaith network of clergy members and spiritualists who are a part of that clergy coalition, and we are continuing to grow. We meet every other Monday night. We just had a meeting this past Monday, and it's just great to see the diversity in the clergy members that we have, and to see us all come together just to stand morally against Cop City because of the moral implications of that project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's gonna be it for this evening, unless Micah or Kiana, you have final. You're done, Micah?
No,
Okay.
thank you for having me.
We talked plenty.
Yeah.
And so well. I feel like you not only give us the class, I feel like I've been to church. I appreciate you so much. So let me remind you all that we do these monthly webinars. Our next webinar is going to be in June. No, am I right?
Yeah, June 12th.
June 12th is right. And it is about the IMF and the World Bank and how they are being used and have always been used as tools of imperialism. Ben Norton will be one of our presenters. And the other is, what is her name? Zuckerman.
Elaine Zuckerman.
Who actually did work for the World Bank at one time. And now she's a critic of it from a gendered point of view, as how it affects people of, not just people of color around the world, but people of various genders and women and LGBTQ, and they are more strongly affected than others. Anyway, she speaks to that issue. So that's on June 12th, and we'll send you out the link in the follow-up letter. And it looks like Brian just posted the link in the chat. Thank you, Brian, for doing that. And yeah, you can sign up now. There's a beat the Christmas rush. Thank you, Brian.
I love it.
So again, thank you so much, Reverend Kiana, Micah. You are the best. We love you so much. We're with you. We're with you in solidarity. We're with you in heart, with you in spirit, and we'll do what we can.
Thank you so much.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Let's everybody keep on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.